Okay, hello everybody. I know it's been a long day. I hope you're all happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. And so what I'm going to be doing is just giving you a short talk about technology and its relationship with our future, our global future, our personal future, our economic future, and even our environmental future. So what we hear again and again and again, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, is that we now live in the age of AI. Look at this image here, right? Now, why is it that all of a sudden we have arrived at this time? And it's because of a few major changes that have occurred just in the last couple decades. And what are those changes? The price per computing has dropped exponentially. The price per storage has dropped exponentially, and all of us have these phones in our pockets or in our hands or everywhere, right? So almost anything we do today leaves what is called a digital footprint, which means anything we do essentially can be represented in some quantifiable form as a series of ones and zeros. And that is why every major technology company, and I study them, Chinese ones, American ones, Indian ones, and technology all over the world, describes itself as an AI company. So I want to just start by putting that in your mind. Why is it now that we are in an age of AI, and what does it mean for us all? Well, really what it means is a massive economic transformation that has occurred in the world just in the last 15 to 20 years, right? We all go online for services, right? We book hotels, we book transportation, we buy things using e-commerce platforms, we even socialize using various social media platforms. But all of those are actually occurring through platforms, right? So look at this slide here. We see images of Uber, Facebook, Alibaba, and Airbnb. And these are the biggest companies, they're not just technology companies, these are the biggest hotel, transportation, accommodation, media companies in the history of the world. But one thing is very important when we think about these companies. They own almost nothing, and they hire almost nobody. That's really interesting, huh? What a business model. You have almost no costs at all, but you monetize every peer-to-peer transaction using a technology, right? So I'm a Stanford graduate from the late 1990s, and I have many friends who are very, very advanced in these companies. And I know the business models, and I know basically the model is to be the platform, the interface between all of us. So anytime we communicate with one another, right, using WhatsApp, for example, which is owned by Facebook, there's a company in the middle that's monetizing every transaction. And what are they monetizing? They're monetizing our personal data. And that data is being used algorithmically, which I can talk with you all about, to basically sell us advertisements. So that is a massive transformation economically, and you can think about it in terms of macroeconomics, and especially this being a conference that's focused on millennials and Gen Z, we have to think about what are the jobs of the future going to look like. What is the future of work, and what is the future of workers? And what's the future of economics in relation to these digital transformations that are occurring? Of course, there are problems. I work closely with the Brookings Institute in the United States and other policymakers in our United States Congress. I worked for President Biden and Vice President Harris on their Innovation Policy Committee. And we're really concerned, and I think many of you know we're having the midterm elections right now in the United States as we speak. I was up all night doing media, doing stuff for Al Jazeera and other networks, ABC, CBS, discussing it. And what we have seen occur is that information that is incorrect, not just incorrect, but extremist and outrageous, tends to go viral across different platforms. So it's not just misinformation, it's what we call disinformation, which at times is intentionally misleading information. Why is that? It's not because the platforms, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, want to tell us something that's not true. It's all because of correlation, because something is there in our minds and our brains as humans where we pay attention, we pay more attention to content that's more extreme. It's just how we are. If there is a car accident or a fire, trust me, we will all pay attention. And this relates to a couple hormones that are part of our brain: dopamine, cortisol, and adrenaline. So this is just something that is true. So these technology platforms tend to let this content go viral. And this content that goes viral tends to be more visible, obviously, right? Because there's so much content online. What determines what we see and how we see it? And it's all based on pattern recognition and correlation. Because more people look at that content, it gets served to each of us. So this is a major issue for our time, because as a global society, and you all are the future, especially our younger ones here, you all are the future, Gen Z, millennials, and so on. My students are mainly Gen Z, right? As a professor at UCLA, we have to think about how we can all come together as a global community and agree on certain things. That's critical for our times in a world that it feels is getting more and more polarized. And that polarization is not actually because of who we are as human beings, it's partly because of these platforms and these technologies. Okay, next slide. Yes, here we go. This is a huge challenge for us also on an economic level in the United States. I'm sorry to say, I'm an American citizen. I was born in the United States. My parents are from India. I don't know how many of you know this, but for the first time in the history of the United States, our youngest generation is making less than its parents. This is in the United States, even if you account for inflation, which we know is a huge problem for now. If you control for inflation, this is the first time in the history of the US where the youngest generation, I mean Gen Z and younger, is making less than its parents. Now, why is that? That's because people are being employed, but they're not getting enough money out of that employment to adjust for the nature of costs. Certainly, that's a huge issue in relation to inflation. That was a dominant issue in relation to the midterms that just came out here in the United States. So there are two major trends that are really troubling, and a lot of this is connected to these digital platforms, right? Because if you can't give people secure resources and work amidst all these issues, you have this problem. So in the US, we have this fading American dream, as much as I believe in it, but we also have a lowering life expectancy. How can, in a country with the most advanced health facilities, I know they have them here as well, how can life expectancy be decreasing? Because the digital revolution that we're witnessing, we're in the middle of right now, is unevenly distributed. And that's a huge issue. We need to make it work for everybody so that all our economies will come together. So we're thinking a lot about what to do. I advise policymakers in the United States, I advise policymakers in the European Union and other parts of the world, in India, around what are the jobs of the future going to look like. And one argument that's being made is we need to think creatively about jobs that work with robotic systems, jobs that work with algorithms. So this is a great example. If we are building robotic systems to do mining work or fossil fuel work, how can we train those robotic systems based on our own intelligence? So instead of thinking about machines replacing humans, let's think about relationships that are economically beneficial between humans and machines. This is also a huge issue in the United States. I am good friends with this man named Andrew Yang. I've done his podcast with him. I'm quite close to him. And one of our major issues that came up in the presidential campaign, for which President Biden ended up winning, beating former President Trump, was the idea that maybe one model we can apply as we think about the future, because of these problems with economic degradation and the fading American dream idea that I was discussing, is to give everybody a little bit of money every month. This is called universal basic income. Many of you have heard of this. This has existed for centuries. And this is very important as a possibility, as a potential policy that we can think about in the future. Why is it? Because if these major companies are relying on all of us for our own data, and we are worthless, that's not going to be good for them either, right? So we need to think about win-win policies. And this is something I'm going to be speaking about likely at the World Economic Forum coming up next January. We need to think about circular economies of the future that recognize that these digital transformations have impacted work, access to work, and economic security. And maybe one of the best models is to just give everybody enough so they can be part of a consumer economy, but more importantly, they can take care of themselves, their families, their children, and so on. Now, on a global level, I want you to see this image. This is an actual map of the internet itself. People ask me, what is the internet? How do we get access to the internet? Well, it's through two major methods. It's through fiber optic cables that are underneath the ocean surface, and it's through satellites. But if you look at this image, you can see that not all parts of the world are connected to one another, right? In fact, you can only see a couple cables between the two most populated continents of the southern hemisphere, South America and Africa. Do you see that? There's just a couple cables. So what that means is digital connectivity is still uneven in the world. And this is a huge challenge, especially in Africa, because Africa has the youngest population in the world, the fastest growing population in the world, and it's definitely the new frontier for where technology will be heading. And the Chinese know this very well. The Chinese know this very, very well, as I'm going to speak about in a moment. Look at that. Many of you have heard of the new Silk Road initiative, right? We all know about the old Silk Road, right? Better than anyone. Being from the Middle East, being from India, myself, right? This was a pathway of trade. One thing that we all know, and you know it better than anyone here in Saudi Arabia, is how historic our cultures and our societies are. How we were all connected in different ways of trade, centuries ago, millennia ago, and so on. So the Chinese are very intelligently investing in many different parts of the world. They have over 170 countries that are part of Xi Jinping's new One Belt, One Road initiative. And that doesn't come for free. Nothing comes for free, right? So I've been in Kenya and Ethiopia and Uganda, many other countries in Africa doing my field work, for example, because I'm an engineer, but I'm also trained as a social scientist and a storyteller. And I've seen all these highways and infrastructure that the Chinese are building, but they are getting those for access to coltan and other rare earth minerals that are in every digital device. So this device you're holding, sir, has coltan, it has lithium, and it has a dozen other minerals, many of which are mostly only found in Africa itself. So these are new global models of the future. We're seeing the G7 model. Now we're seeing with the election of Lula, the re-emergence and Modi and Xi Jinping and so on, the BRICS model, right? There's different forms of global partnerships, and they all are going to have to play with technology and this digital revolution. So I have been writing for quite a few years about the incredible innovations that are coming from Africa. And you may not know this, but in countries like Kenya, remarkable new technologies are being designed. More is being designed with less. This is a whole other model of innovation, right? Innovation doesn't just come when you have infinite resources. Innovation sometimes comes when you have to be resourceful. And so what these guys have been doing are building 3D printers. I'm going to show you an image of this, out of complete electronic waste. Can you believe this? 95% of this 3D printer, built by people on the street who studied engineering, is built from waste, from trash. So this is a whole new model of thinking about a regenerative economy, a circular economy, right? Why are they doing this? Because they can't afford to do anything else. But here's the crazy thing. These 3D printers are outperforming American and Chinese printers, because they're designed by people in places who understand the ecosystem, the infrastructure, the environments of those places. So what we need to think about as we further and further globalize with technology is how we can empower the different voices for people in different places in the world. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because people have a creative and remarkable intelligence in our world, and they have that intelligence based on who they are and where they are. And that's one of the greatest joys for me as a storyteller, as a writer. I've written a few books, as a journalist, right? Is to really think about these new visions of the future, not in a way that's just critical of the problems, but regenerative. What are new visions of the world? And so I wrote this piece on the educational side of things for the World Economic Forum, which is occurring in Davos this coming year. I know we have Davos in the desert here. I haven't gone to that yet. But this is really about how we need, as educators, right? I'm a professor, but even in schools itself, we need to teach digital literacy. We need to teach data literacy. We need to teach algorithmic literacy. Algorithms are just rules. They're patterns that are written in code. Algorithms actually were invented here in the Middle East by mathematicians over 1,000 years ago. So we need to think not just about STEM education, but also a type of education that recognizes these profound transformations that are occurring that we're right in the middle of when we talk about AI, the metaverse, cryptocurrencies, all of these issues, right? So these need to be part of our educational systems. So this is a piece I wrote. You're welcome to look that up. But I think more than anything, we need to recognize, and the pandemic showed us this. I mean, you guys did a great job of knocking that out. We didn't have, not knocking it out, but protecting yourselves from it. We didn't in the United States, as you all know. But it showed us more than anything that our world is global. Climate issues are global. Pandemics are global. Global trade is global. Culture is global. History is global. The digital world is global. So it's time for us to really think about global, not just in an America-centric way or a China-centric way, but in a way that empowers the different stakeholders that are part of our world today. Thank you very much.